And so hi, everyone that's joining us on Facebook as well. We're really happy to have you here. And we're really happy to everybody who's joining us this evening. I'm seeing a couple of comments about my audio, so I'm going to try to clear that up a little bit. If anybody needs any troubleshooting, again, the chat's a great place for that. Okay, so thank you all for your patience as we get through some of these logistical things. We're so happy to have you all here this evening for Media Depictions of OCD, a community conversation. I'm going to introduce our panelists very shortly, but first I am going to introduce NAMI-NYC, the host of this event, the National Alliance on Mental Illness of New York City. We are a grassroots mental health organization and our mission is to provide support, education, and advocacy to all individuals and families impacted by mental illness. So this means we have free virtual classes and support groups, both for people dealing with mental health issues themselves, and also for anybody who's supporting someone living with a mental health issue. All of our classes and groups are facilitated by people who themselves are living with a mental health issue or are supporting somebody. So that's what we mean when we say peer-led. I could say more, but I want to leave plenty of time for our speakers and for the conversation that I'm really hoping that we will be able to have this evening about media depictions. So if you'd like to know more, please just go to our website at NAMI-NYC.org or call our helpline at 212-684-3264. And we should be popping that into the chat momentarily as well. For this conversation, we have three wonderful panelists who I'm really honored to be sharing a Zoom screen with. We have Delshawn, a native New Yorker who's in a long-term love-hate relationship with the Knicks and the Giants. He's also a real estate investor, has a bit of an addiction to candy, and ends most of his nights with a horror movie. We have Katie, who lives in Manhattan, where she works as an associate director in advocacy relations for pharma and biotech companies. In her free time, she spends time with her French bulldog named Flash, family, friends, and searching for the best coffee shops she can find. And Louis Horowitz, a high school English teacher, basketball coach, a father of a 13-year-old daughter, and husband to a wonderful wife, and who began working as an advocate and activist in the OCD community in 2015, after attending his first national OCD conference held in Boston. So tonight, as I'm sure many of you have been able to tell from the event description, we are going to alternate between watching video clips, hearing from our panelists, and hearing from you all. We do only have an hour, so I'm trying to rush through this intro part, so we may not get to hear everybody's perspective, but I am really excited to hear different thoughts and perspectives. I do want to highlight, as we sort of go into our first clip, that we may have different experiences of seeing these various depictions, and that's okay. No one here, even our panelists, can speak for everyone's experience of dealing with a particular mental health issue or a particular everyone's experience of living with OCD. So we're not placing a seal of approval on any of these representations. Our hope is that they're going to spark conversations and reactions. And I wanted especially to highlight that, given, as Delshawn, Katie, and Louis can attest, we had a lot of difficulty finding representations of OCD at all. And so our goal is to talk about, what we're looking for in representation, what we look for in depictions, how these depictions make us feel, acknowledging that folks are going to have different experiences and reactions. I do also want to note that some of the clips do have content that may be upsetting, and I am going to give specific warnings for sexual content and violence before each clip where that warning would apply. But do note that all the clips do contain descriptions and depictions of compulsions, either compulsions, obsessions, or intrusive thoughts. So that's kind of an across the board warning. So with that, I am going to share my screen and start our first clip. Hopefully I will be able to do that as smoothly as possible. Okay.
You're really going to take that chance?
Nope.
Yeah.
We need to start this from the beginning. Okay. Can everybody hear the sound of the clip okay? Great. Okay, here we go.
So, if you don't wash your hands, I think you're going to die. Fine. Let's just see. You're really going to take that chance? Yeah, man, I'm calling your bluff. I'm not bluffing, I'm being proactive. Well, let's just wait and see what happens when I don't wash my hands. Well, it's not going to happen right away. It could happen at any moment. And, maybe it's not you who's in danger. Oh, God, fine. I'll do it. You're so bleak, man. All right, good talk. So,
Great. So that's our first clip, very short. And I'd love to hear from whichever of our panelists would like to kick us off.
Yeah, I can jump in first. I love that clip because I think it's funny. It brings light to something that I think is, first of all, really common right now. Everyone's top of mind thought when it comes to OCD, I think, is hand washing component. You see a lot of that in media, or you assume, oh, someone who has OCD, they're very compulsive about washing their hands and it's cleanliness. But there's so much behind that in terms of why they feel the need to do it, that it's not just about being clean. It's really about what that video is showing, this idea that not doing that action or participating in that ritual can lead to something down the line that could end up harming somebody else that you love or you care about, or even people that you don't know. So it's this real reaction of fear that sort of puts you in this position of doing these tiny little things that end up taking so much more of your time. And that conversation, that dynamic between her OCD self and her regular self, that's something I personally feel all the time, needing to, talk to myself constantly to be like, well, you don't really need to do this. You know that that's not going to cause that. If you spin around in a circle that way, it's not going to make exiting the door any better than if you spin around left, because that was one of my compulsions for a very long time that I just over a year ago broke. So I think that one's just a really lighthearted way to kind of get to the point of that. But I want to hear what you guys think too, my other panelists.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think levity is extremely important when you're treating OCD. And when I've been scripting or writing, and I've actually written out dialogue just like that, where I'm having conversations with my OCD. I used to say things like, my OCD has OCD, and just, but also I think it creates an important separation between the person and then their disorder, where there's you and then there's your OCD. And that's one of the first things you learn in treatment, is to make that separation that does not encompass your entire being. It's one part of you. And if you can establish that, that's a huge step to make in your process to recovery. And that video definitely represents that idea of the separation between the two.
Yeah, as for me, I could really relate to just the concept that she was depicting in the video of just constantly talking to myself around, more so for me, my thoughts, these intrusive thoughts that I've had a very difficult time being able to shake. It didn't dawn on me how much I talked to myself until I went on vacation with two of my friends, and we shared a hotel room. And they said, Del, you're always talking to yourself. And I said to myself, I was like, is it really that bad? They said, yeah, every time you're by yourself, we think someone else is in the room with you, but you're alone and you're talking to yourself. And so, it really just set in that, I think people with OCD, it's almost as if you have someone else that you're constantly trying to convince of something, or you're trying to unconvince yourself of something that you've actually come to believe over the years.
Yeah, for sure. So I did put a question in the chat, and I thank you all for kind of bringing your own experiences into this. It's definitely what we're trying to do. I'd love to hear from any audience members briefly, because we do want to keep going to our next clip. How does humor give you perspective on either your own mental health struggles or people's mental health struggles that you may be close to? If anybody would like to speak to that, you can put it in the chat. You can also use the raise hand function. And I believe we'll be able to see that as well. We can also just jump ahead to the next one and see
To break the silence, I could say something about humor.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
But I mean, some of the thoughts and the images that OCD produces are just, they're outrageous, and you don't first take them that way. You're terrified by them, and they spin, and they're relentless and they're upsetting. But once you start working on them and identifying, and then you start writing them out, and you look at what you're writing, you're like, this is crazy, this is ridiculous, it doesn't make any sense. And things that don't make any sense can be funny. But so, like, I remember, as I've been scripting certain things and trying to get creative and weird, and it's just, once you find some separation to it and you could be a little more objective and you look back on it, like, this is crazy, this is wild, funny imagination stuff, but didn't feel so funny when I was in the middle of an OCD spell. There's not much funny about it when you're in the middle of it.
Yeah. And somebody just shared in the chat, when I was uninformed, I thought Hoarders was a funny show, right? I think that, like, sometimes that distance can make it possible to laugh at people who are struggling, to be like, oh, those people, their fact that they're going through this is funny. And to kind of, so I think that's the double edge of humor, is that when it's joking about other people as opposed to joking, what I love about this clip is that it's somebody joking about themselves, right? Like, there's a big difference between joking about what somebody else's struggles, because, like you said, it's not funny if you're in the middle of it and you're not able to get that distance. So yeah, thank you, Sapna, for that comment. So let's go ahead and go to our next clip. Again, I will share my screen. Hopefully it will go smoothly. Oh, we're going to share my sound. Lovely. Okay. Where's my screen? There it is. Okay. Hannah Horvath should be up, correct? That's what folks can see. Lovely. Okay, here we go.
Timeless. I'm just as happy now to see her performance when I was in my barefoot days.
You guys, things are going really, really well with my book. My first pages are due next week, and I've gotten a lot done, so I feel like if I continue at this rate, then I'm gonna get there quickly with the book.
What's up, honey?
Louis.
Nothing, I'm just telling you about my book.
You're counting to
Louis.
8. No, she's counting.
Maybe
No, I'm
after
not.
the show.
I'm not.
Look, if your head is filling up and you're getting county, we need to know. We can help you, but not if you don't let us know.
Well, how would you help me? If it was going on, theoretically, which it isn't, so I don't need help.
We'd bring you home for a little bit and get you straightened out with Dr. Shupak with your OCD.
Dr. Shupak is a pediatrician, okay? And I don't have OCD. If I did have OCD, I would tell you because I wouldn't be able to hold that in.
Sweetie, you're not holding it in.
I'm not holding it in because I don't have to hold it in because it's not going on, Mom. And if it was, don't you think that I would say something to you about it? Okay, it hurts me more than it hurts you. I'm the one who has to experience it, not you. I'm the one who has to experience it.
You think we didn't experience it? You think we didn't suffer worrying about whether you'd have a normal life? No, we don't know why you had OCD. We don't know why. I mean, we're still married. We never raised a hand to you.
Of course
It's not our fault.
Okay.
Well, it's genetic, which is sort of the ultimate your fault. So,
Oh, come on.
I mean, this hasn't happened since high school.
And it was very
I apologize for pausing. I just realized that I did not give the content warning that I promised for this video. So just for folks to know, this clip does contain a character describing their own compulsions, and some of those compulsions are sexual in nature. There are no sexual images in the clip. So I just wanted to give that warning in this cut between scenes.
bad in high school?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty bad. I counted stuff. It was bad.
What did you count?
Every pulse in my vagina. I would force myself to see things on a loop of 8, like sexual things, murder things.
So it was really a classical presentation.
Well, okay. Then I guess it's classic to have to masturbate 8 or 16 times a night until your legs shake and you're crying and you're trying to make sure that your parents didn't hear you. So you check their door 8 times. Then you move your toothbrush 64 times. Then you move your dad's toothbrush 64 times. Then you go back and forth between the two, moving each one 8 times until you've reached 64 times. But then you realize that that doesn't feel quite right either. And suddenly it's 3 in the morning and you're fucking exhausted and you go to school the next day looking like a zombie. It's classical. Anyway, I took medicine, so.
Are you taking medicine now?
Mm-mm.
Why?
Because it made me tired.
How tired?
Very tired.
So why are your parents so worried, do you think?
Because they think I seem anxious.
Do you have a reason to be anxious?
I went through a breakup about a month ago.
And was that stressful?
Yeah, it was pretty stressful. He acted very crazy and not normal, and he's still trying to contact me, so.
And that was unwanted?
In some ways, I mean, I can't really decide if he's like the greatest person in the world or the worst, and I should probably take my space till I figure that out, according to everybody, so. Also, I don't really think you would understand any of my problems because you seem like you have a tremendous amount of willpower and general togetherness.
And why do you say that?
Well, I'm not gonna like give you a compliment now.
Okay, cool. So I would love to hear from our panelists. Thank you for I see some comments in the chat, so thank you for that. But yeah, I'd love to hear from our panelists.
I'll just jump in real quick and say that's the perfect example of funny when you're not in the middle of it. Like if I would have watched that when my OCD was really bad, not funny at all, I would probably sweat, my heart would start pounding because it would remind me of everything I'm in the middle of. But now when I watch it, it's hilarious. It's well done. It's the dialogue is fantastic, and it's accurate, and she does it really well. And I've actually heard that actress actually has OCD, but it is funny, not funny. Anyway, that's it for now. It was just a perfect example, though.
Yeah, I also think what really stands out to me, at least about that clip, is the family component of it and the family dynamic, because, you know, she's saying, you don't have OCD, I have OCD. But when, you know, you're living with someone or you're with your parents or your partner, they're going to experience those types of things as well. They're going to either see what's going on or understand that something might be happening, but they might not understand it fully because, like we spoke to before, the OCD compulsions and obsessions don't really make sense. They're just a driver from like fear and anxiety and this need to control specific things. In my own experience, like my family played a really big role and still does in supporting me and, you know, monitoring me and holding me accountable for different coping mechanisms that I've learned over the years to keep my OCD, you know, at bay. And there's still sort of sometimes a component of denial of like, I'm fine, I'm better. But I think that really is just a point to the fact that OCD isn't necessarily something that has a cure, you know, it's something that, you know, I'm going to live with and it's part of my life and it's not who I am. I can live with it, and with my family, they're gonna help me live with it, and tangentially they'll have to be living with it too in some way. But I thought that was interesting because that's normally not something that we see in media. It's usually just like this is a you problem, and like this person is now the problem because of their mental illness.
Yeah, I really loved how they added the component of humor to it, because I think overall in society, people would just say, hey, this is my OCD kicking in, whether it's, you know, you're putting together a presentation and a person saying, hey, let's change this to a turquoise blue versus the color blue that you have. But it really resonated with me because you know, the clip kind of brought back thoughts from my childhood you know, OCD habits that I had that I grew out of and just kind of forgot about. You know, I used to count the towel in my school classrooms. For years, I would not step on cracks while walking down the street. It was just a regular thing for me. I would have to, if I licked my lip, I would have to lick all four corners multiple times without stopping. And I never really knew what that was until I actually took an assessment on OCD, and then finding out, wow, you know, all of these different habits that I had, you know, this was all a part of a diagnosis that I was completely unaware of until I was in my 30s. So I thought the clip was great.
Yeah, and I think that also brings up a great point about diagnosis and finding the doctor that can make the right diagnosis. There's, I think, a number of elements of OCD that really may look like other diseases. Like I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, manic depression, treatment resistant depression. So it's really like a balance of finding the right doctor, finding the right medication. Obviously, in that clip, going to your pediatrician really isn't going to help much. And finding a doctor you can connect with is also really important to getting better in the way that you can at that time. And I think Andrea has a question.
I just
Yeah.
wanted.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just one thing real quick is that it highlighted an important point about she mentioned she had just gone through a breakup, and OCD ebbs and flows, and then when there's major triggers in life, it comes roaring back. And you know, for me, it's gone dormant for some years and dipped, and I thought I was okay, and then it's come back after a breakup. I've had a marriage end because of OCD, and then the OCD came roaring back. And then some years ago, after my mother died, my OCD was worse than it had ever been, and I thought I had moved on from it. So these external life triggers play an important component, and you just got to be cautious about it with your disorder and know that, you know, you're susceptible and vulnerable when life gets chaotic. And mental illness doesn't mean you're always mentally ill. It just means you're more vulnerable to get ill when, you know, life gets hard. So that was an important point that she was triggered again, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Max had a comment in the chat that the clip does a good job of highlighting the powerlessness and how it can impact day-to-day life and the repercussions. So talking about not being able to sleep and feeling stigma, feeling depressed, feeling misunderstood. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and John made the comment that when someone doesn't want to have the disorder, it's not funny. And I think that's absolutely true. As several of our panelists sort of highlighted, some things, the perspectives on something like this can shift even like for one person over the course of their experience. So I had a question for the audience and would love to just kind of continue to hear people's perspectives about who you sympathize with in this scene. Because I think there's a couple of different characters and a couple of different relationships. Yeah, I'd love to hear where it feels, and from our panelists, where it feels like the sympathy is being directed in the clip. And so, Andrea, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you if you'd like to speak.
Yes, it kind of reminded me of the emotional stages of recovery and how she's struggling with just the idea of acknowledging that she has a mental illness and the stigma attached to that, which is like one of the earlier stages of emotional recovery. And just, so I really sympathized with her because she's struggling to incorporate this into her identity and rejecting that part of her identity. She hasn't made that separation that the panelists were talking about between, her illness and herself. And so I felt really sad also to have that the therapist was seemed like a very traditional sort of Freudian, Victorian type of therapist with no expression of caring. I don't know, for me, it's really important that I feel that the person I'm talking with is attuned to me and has some kind of skin in the game in terms of caring about me. So that neutrality, it seemed sad and offensive to the character to be stereotyped or said that she's, instead of it being validating because it came from someone very uncaring, it just felt like he was putting her in a little box and minimizing instead of showing the commonality. So it showed a really crappy therapist, I think, the media depiction.
Yeah, thank you. And a couple of people said, one person said, Hannah is really the person that is sympathized with and not the parents. And as you said, Andrea, not the therapist. I don't know, do any of our panelists want to kind of respond to that? And then we'll go on to our next clip.
I just want to say, Andrea, yeah, that was well said. And one thing you highlighted that is important about the wrong therapy or the wrong type of therapist. I went through probably 9 or 10, to be honest with you, that never treated OCD. Almost 20 years without finding the proper therapist. And some even led me down a path that made my OCD worse, not intentionally, of course, but the analyst type of therapy is no good for OCD. It's all the CBT and the actual OCD treatment that gets you through it. So it was a really good point about the wrong type of therapist. And it's crucial, absolutely crucial in your treatment to find the right type of therapist.
I'll jump in. I will say I sympathize with the parents because clearly they want what's best for their daughter, but they feel completely powerless over being able to change anything. So they'll offer up recommendations, and a lot of times, and even just in real life, you might offer a recommendation that might not necessarily help. I know in my community, a lot of people will say, if you had OCD or if you were dealing with a mental illness in general, they'll just say, well, you feel down, pray about it. And that might work for you, but it might not necessarily work for a person who does have OCD, who actually might need medication or talk therapy to get through that.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting how I think the funniest part of that clip for me was the therapist and just being so typical. And how does that make you feel? Like, are you sad about that? And it's like, well, what is that information really getting you? And OCD is not really an uncommon diagnosis, but the lack of awareness around it, especially among psychiatrists and therapists, is really kind of shocking to me. I went to many therapists, and they all missed this diagnosis, which looking back on it seems so obvious until I went to a treatment program, and the OCD specialist was like, within 5 minutes, she was like, yeah, you have OCD. There's no doubt about that. I was like, what? Why did it take so long? Like, it was actually a relief to get that, because then I was able to get the right treatment for OCD, which is pretty specific and pretty helpful if you put your energy into it.
Just one final point on this, and this kind of relates to what Lewis and Katie said, in regards to them going out and finding therapists. For me, I would say I was rather lucky. So I would, I tip my hat to the 2 therapists I've worked with over the years. I think, as soon as I stepped in the psychiatrist's office, I just was very open about what was going on. And he pretty much diagnosed it within that first session. So I consider myself incredibly lucky to have people who were able to spot what was going on, and then offer up recommendations on how to treat it. And those recommendations have proven to be effective over the years.
That's awesome. Thanks everybody. So let's move on to our next clip. Thank you everybody for your thoughts on this. Again, momentary pause while I share. Okay. Close that.
Christ almighty, you've seen 8,000 goddamn wheels. I mean, choose one, please. Just one of them.
I know.
This one?
I know. This one's pretty close. Pretty close. Odie. That man sweeping up over there. Does he work for me? I mean, have you seen him before?
It was Nick. Something like that.
Why is he looking at me?
I don't know.
Fire him. And make sure they use damp brooms from now on. Respiratory diseases are expensive, and I don't want a bunch of damn lawsuits.
Okay, but can we at least proceed with the instrument panel we discussed? The tool shop's ready to go.
No, I want to see the blueprints again.
Howard, the deadline is now completely unrealistic. At this rate, the war is going to be over by the time she's done. Now, I need you here to help consult on vital decisions, and you're off dealing with movies. You got 1,000 goddamn workers waiting for you to make a decision here.
Hey, Odie! Take it easy, all right? I understand you're under a lot of pressure, but it's going to do me no good if you crack up on me like that. All right? Look, take a couple hours off, all right? You relax a little bit.
Okay.
See your wife.
Okay.
Should have shown me all the blueprints.
All right.
Blueprints. Yeah, blueprints. I'm serious now. Show me all the blueprints. 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 I want to get this done right, so show me all the blueprints. 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 Show me
Q. U. A. R. A. N. T. I. N. E. Quarantine.
Okay. Thoughts?
I'll start with this one. I think I love this clip. I think it's represented fantastically. I think first you see something building, like so there's a trigger and it was the other guy and the paranoia, it's the specifics I don't think matter because it's just the general message that it's sending. And then you watch it build and build to then he has a full-blown episode and he can't make it stop. And this idea of like trying to get something right, like saying that word blueprints over and over. And people with OCD, you do something over and over and over again until you try to get it right. And there's no end game to that. You don't know what makes it right. It just somehow feels right, or you have to force yourself to walk away. I think it represents the real distress in an OCD episode, the anxiety. And I think that the end, because this is what, 1950s, I believe, right? Where the treatment wasn't current, it's somewhere around there. I think that his approach to his episode was to try to make it go away. And that's the wrong approach with OCD. The more you try to repress it, the stronger it gets. So the more he was trying to stop saying the repetitive words and then cover his mouth and try to say something else, it's ineffective ultimately. The way to treat your OCD is to go right after the thought, not try to repress it. So I think that in that clip, it says quite a bit. Okay, so time period, it's 20s to 40s. Yeah. Anyway, that's my take. I could go on about that clip for an hour, I think,
Yeah, as for me, it's what jumped out is the constantly repeating yourself. I was diagnosed as having pure OCD, and one of the conversations that I would frequently have with myself is, I should kill myself. And this is just something that I say out loud, sometimes just in my head over and over and over again. And I could be having a perfect day. I could be laying on a beach, enjoying the sunset. Everything could be going fine, but because I have these frequent intrusive thoughts, this is one of those thoughts that just pops up, and sometimes it's just in my head, and sometimes I verbalize it, and I will verbalize it over and over and over again until I'm able to sort of shift my attention to something else.
Yeah, I think that clip is so rich, and there's so much depth to it in terms of anxiety attacks and OCD and the different triggers. What stood out to me most, I think, was that moment when he gets into the car and tries to put his hands over his mouth, almost to like stop himself from saying this word. And I've felt myself in that position so many times, not, from physically repeating something out loud, but just trying to stop myself from thinking. And as Lewis said, like, that approach doesn't work, and it actually causes so much more harm and pain and distress. But sometimes just even getting the words out feels scarier than keeping them inside your head, because for me, I feel like if I put this out there, like, that means it's going to become even more real versus just staying inside my head. But both of those thoughts are equally dangerous and harmful to yourself and the people around you who really have no idea what's going on. And there's a fear in expressing it, partly because it could make it real, and the fear of being judged or misunderstood. And I think that happens a lot with anxiety and panic and OCD especially.
Yeah, and I think the clip kind of captures that. The friend Odie is kind of looking at him with this like look of very much of judgment and confusion. I saw that Ben had a hands up, and then Dana, was that I do see, okay, I can't see everyone. So if you just like raise your hand in your screen, I may not see you, but Dana, I do see you. So if you'd like to go after Ben, please feel free. And Ben, I've just asked you to unmute, so you may get a little pop-up that says that the host is asking you if you want to unmute. Ben may not be there. Okay, Dana, I'm gonna go ahead and ask you to unmute. Here you go. So you'll have to click.
Okay, I got it.
There you go.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. All right. So I love that movie, seen it a million times, but I have to tell you, that particular scene caused my anxiety because I got it, it was real. And every time he repeated himself, I was like, oh God. What I liked about that particular scene was at the end in the car. See, I feel a little bit of the opposite. I thought he was trying to ground himself, that there was this final little click that went of a self-awareness, and he spelling, quarantine to ground himself. Now this here, no, I don't get, but I have a word that I use when I start getting anxious and irritated and my OCD is triggered. And I am aware, then when I become aware of it, I say out loud, stop, and it stops. I stop doing whatever it is I'm doing. It's usually math and never being able to stop looking at the problem and, and making sure, detail, making sure I got it right, that kind of thing. There's a few other things too, but that one is a real problem. So, and I repeat myself also. But I have to feel that self-awareness, and then I'll say stop. But that self-awareness came a long time, and it came through therapy and tools and cognitive behavioral therapy as well as talk therapy. So that's all I had to say.
Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing. Ben, I do see you in the chat that you unmuted. So I'm not sure what happened, but I'm going to try to ask you to unmute again. There we go. Okay, we should be able to.
Okay,
yep.
But can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I thought this was a great dramatization of the repetition of OCD, the repetitiousness, you might say, of OCD. But the one thing I didn't like about it is that it was, for me, OCD was a very secretive disease. I did not want other people to know it, and I certainly didn't repeat anything I said to anybody. Now, my thinking was repeating, or I might do something like if I were talking and having dinner, I might pick up my fork and put it back and pick up my fork and put it back and pick up my fork and put it back if I knew I wasn't going to be seen. So I think the scene, what movie was that from?
The Aviator.
The Aviator. Oh, right, of course. I think if it had been, the thoughts had been going on in his head and we heard them rather than him saying it, I just didn't find, I haven't found anybody in my own practice and in my own experience with OCD that lets other people know that they have this repetitiousness. I mean, that's an indication, you know, it's pathological, but you can't stop it. So, but you damn well don't want anybody to know about it. And when I had OCD, I was living in a house with 5 people, and it was hard work, not letting my brothers and sisters and mother and father or any relative come into the environment, let them know that I had something like that going on. I would do things, but I wanted it to be hush hush.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like lots of different experiences, right?
You think I could comment real
Yeah,
quick on? I just want to say to Dana, yeah, I do the same thing, and I don't think, saying the stop is repression, but that's self-awareness. I'll be in the middle of something all the time. Delshon talked about talking to himself, and I'll be in the middle of something like, dude, stop. Like, this is OCD. Just remember that real quick. This is not you. And then, oh yeah, that's the reminder. And then whatever that looks like. And then to Ben, I think what's good about that clip is you're right about 100% right about the shame that people carry with OCD and the secretiveness. And I know that about myself for a long, long time. And being able to air your shame out is one of the best ways to treat your OCD, to show that it doesn't have the power over you. But excuse me, I think the fact that he tried to like leave the scene and get away from the guy and go hide in his car, I think that did show that he couldn't help it in front of his partner, and he did go isolate to hide in the middle of his anxiety attack. But yeah, so that's what I wanted to respond with.
I also think that that's a fantastic point about how he needed to remove himself from the situation to not be, criticized or embarrassed or feel shame. And similarly, as Ben was talking about, trying to hide those things that you do, I think in part the things that I tried to hide were things I knew made no sense at all. But I couldn't stop them. And if anyone noticed them, it would be so embarrassing to even try to explain, like, well, I'm doing this, I'm picking up this pencil and I'm moving it to the other side of my desk, because otherwise there might be an earthquake in Indonesia that I cause. And like, that's a serious, real, magical thinking thought. But how do you explain that to someone who has no idea what that's like? But I think that's also, why we're here and why all of you guys are here. And what's so wonderful about that is, like, we're bringing these types of things into the forefront to talk about them honestly and say like, you know, I may pick my fork up and down 17 times and I don't know why, but I feel like I have to. And that's part of my OCD. And just educating people, whatever opportunity there is, I think is so important to help all of the other people out there who are still suffering with this and staying silent about it because they fear the same things.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did want to address, there was a comment in the chat from someone, it was a parent of someone with OCD, saying it's clips like this that may help me understand the process and the distress that she is going through, which helps me to be more compassionate. And that's something I struggle with because as a parent, I used to see it as my job to help her stop the behavior, but it's so much more complicated than that. And it seems more helpful at this point to try to just understand how hard it all is for her and remind her I'm here for her no matter what. I think that's a lovely sentiment. I don't know, panelists, if you wanted to respond to that at all.
I completely agree. And there's so much difficulty, I think, that comes with being a parent or someone or a loved one of someone with OCD, and trying to help them. And like this idea of fixing and just wanting to fix the problem, make you feel better, like take it away from you and the pain that you feel. And that's just not something that's possible. And the things that's always helped me the most is just having somebody to listen to me. Like if I'm going through a panic attack and those words and those thoughts are repeating in my head, just having someone to listen to me until I'm like, you know what? I'm done with this. Like, we are not doing these thoughts anymore. Thank you for listening. I love you. And like, I know you don't know how to help me and you're not trained to help me do that. And that's perfectly okay. Like, your role of being a parent is like the most important one out of all of them for helping a child. And like, that's how I feel towards my family, is like just them being them and trying to understand like as much as they can about what I'm going through, at least understanding what I'm feeling, not what's causing it, has been monumental in my journey.
Thank you, Katie. So I'm just looking at the time, and I'm actually going to put this out to our panelists and see if I think we have two options. We can watch our last clip and have a very quick discussion about it. Or we can sort of, there was a question in the chat, and we can sort of continue on in this discussion with the questions that folks have kind of already been putting out there. What do you all think?
I'm okay with shifting towards the questions that were in the chat.
Okay. Okay, cool. All right. So I apologize that we're not getting to the last clip. I will, it is in the event description if anybody wants to sort of check it out and kind of think about it in the context of this discussion. But there was, I think, a great question earlier for all of the panelists. If you've seen any acting performances of someone with OCD where you felt like the portrayal was not good or offensive in some way, and what made it feel that way? I think that's a really interesting question.
I'm not sure if I could think of anything, excuse me, particular about like a particular scene or depiction, but the general consensus can often misrepresent what OCD really is. Like, there's a lot of people that do say, oh, I'm so OCD and I'm so OCD. And to people that don't have OCD, you're not going to correct them. But when you do, you go, you don't have OCD, because OCD is maladaptive and it causes pain and distress and suffering. It's not organization. It's not that your sock drawer is neat, or that you have to, use 4 different color highlighters, and that's not OCD. So I know it's often misused and then can undermine the absolute intensity of the disorder. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misconceptions or confusion around like OCD versus preference. So like if you want to highlight with 4 different colors, like because it makes you feel better and you like the way it looks, like that's a preference. if you highlight with 4 colors because you need to and you feel like you're going to die if you do not, or cause harm to somebody else, that's OCD. I think one media depiction that we actually I put forward as a possible clip for this was Monk, that TV show. I was thinking of putting it, I had recommended it because I thought it was a mockery of OCD. This guy wakes up, he puts his socks in a plastic baggie, all of his shirts are in color order, which I've done, but this was different. And is at his therapist and he's I'm great, I'm fine, and then goes and reorganizes all the pillows. That's, I think, what media really portrays OCD as, and with the hand washing, when it's really not that, because he walks away from that and he's just happy-go-lucky, not the world's ending, I'm gonna die, everything is my fault, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, any other? Yeah, I was going to bring up Monk, Katie, because I do think that's sort of an interesting, that's when we talked about and then sort of decided that it wasn't as thought-provoking a depiction, because it is kind of a lot of those stereotypes. There's a couple folks are bringing up specific characters. I don't know a lot of these, so I'm not sure if they're considered depictions of OCD or not. One person said Monica in Friends, Professor T, As Good as It Gets. I'm not sure if these are sparking anything for any of our panelists.
I mean, I've seen As Good as It Gets 100 times. I don't know the Monica too well, or Professor T, but I think As Good as It Gets does a good job of representing OCD. The one thing I don't think it does well is how towards the end of the movie, how he starts to turn it around, I think, without representing the treatment he's gone through. Some of the traits of OCD are accurate, but I think it's too much of a quick fix to end a movie, but a lot of what's portrayed in that, there's a lot of suffering portrayed. And I mean, the opening scene is him locking and unlocking his door 20 times, light switches, soap. He doesn't let anyone in his apartment. So there's some real suffering going on there. But I think that, yeah, it's a solid movie.
Yeah, thank you guys. Okay, so we're a little bit past time, but there is one last question that does speak to the clip that we unfortunately didn't get to, and I think it is we can, if each of you can sort of maybe speak to this, and then we'll wrap up. It's about intrusive thoughts. This question says, yeah, I'm curious to hear the panelists discuss intrusive thoughts and how they relate to OCD more generally. Yeah.
Yeah, I can jump in there, because that's something that I've been dealing with for most of my life. For me, and I spoke about some of the thoughts that I have, but it goes even further to where I can see a police officer and look at his gun, and in my head, I'm gonna take his gun, kill him. Now, I've never done that. I'm not a violent person. This is just a thought that sort of pops up in my head. A lot of times I think to myself that I'm just an evil person, or I'm stupid, these sort of thoughts that have no logic that come into my brain. I sit there and I process them, and then I start having a conversation with myself. As I mentioned earlier, I could just be sitting on the beach. It could be a perfect day, and this thought will just pop in and say, you should kill yourself. Even just thoughts of going back to my childhood, even some, and I did see a question about trauma, like PTSD being connected to OCD. For me, I'm just kind of looking back on my childhood, and this is one of the thoughts that escaped me. Something I always worried about having enough food or having enough money as a kid. And this isn't necessarily trauma or PTSD, but I became completely obsessed with money. Like so much so I had a part-time job where I would pack groceries and I would come home and I would literally wash my money in the sink and iron it and lay it flat. And this was like a habit for years and years and years. And it just kind of dawned on me today. I was like, wow, I don't think that it was necessarily something that I always thought it was just me sort of being frugal and focused on money and discipline. But no, I think in the back of my mind, I was constantly worried about not having enough. And by doing that, I was ensuring that if I ever needed money, I would have it. Just because I constantly think that it's not enough. Even as an adult, someone comes over to my house to eat, I'm just thinking there's not enough food. There's not enough food for everyone. Let me go out and get more. So you know, that's where I kind of make these connections at.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. I think, so Katie or Lewis, did either of you want to have any last thoughts before we close out? We're a little over time, but this has been a really great discussion. If either of you wants to
Yeah, I just think the one last sentiment is to come on to a panel like this. And I guess I started doing stuff like this 5-6 years ago, and to show your face and openly say to an audience, whether in person or not, that, hey, I have OCD, and then speak openly about your experiences is some of the best treatment for your OCD that you can do, because what you just take away the shame. You say things out loud to people and they hear you with empathy and understanding. And I think it's huge. And I appreciate this format to be able to do that. And I think anyone who's carrying that shame needs to find somebody to open up to, because shame will kill you, and speak about it openly. And I think you'll be surprised that most people will find the humanity in it, and understand and not judge the way we judge ourselves so harshly. Because when you keep it all bottled up and spin it so much, you're caught in that shame cycle that can eat you alive. So stuff like this needs to keep happening, and people need to open up about it.
Yeah, I think these guys summed everything up really nicely. It's always an honor and so exciting and rewarding to speak with everyone on behalf of NAMI and just continue to raise awareness of OCD and the disorder, the symptoms, the fact that it's more common than you might think. And typically when you start talking about it, there's more people who can relate than can't, at least in some capacity. So I hope everyone found this really informative, and we'll be doing a bunch more different types of things, I'm sure, Clara, or I just made things up and now you have to do them.
No, yeah, we are. Please join us next week. It's also Wednesday, December 15th, but it will be in the afternoon from 1:30 to 2:30. We will be having a very similar discussion to this, focused on mania and depression rather than OCD. So if you enjoyed this, I suspect you may enjoy that event as well. And there will be a follow-up email going to the email that you registered with a link to the recording and other resources, as well as there was a book that was shared in the chat that I'm gonna include as well. So thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to our interpreters. Thank you all for your really wonderful thoughts and questions and perspectives. This is really, achieved my hopes. So I really appreciate all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone. Stay safe, stay well, and we appreciate all of your presences. And again, big thank you to our panelists. You were so thoughtful and honest and transparent, and I think people really benefited from hearing.